Chapter 9. Koroviev's Antics. Nikanor Ivanovich Bosoy, house chairman of number 302B Sadovaya Street in Moscow, where the late Berlioz resided, had his hands full since Wednesday night. At midnight, as we know, the commission, of which Zheldibin was a member, had come and summoned Nikanor Ivanovich. He was informed of Berlioz's death and asked to escort the commission to apartment number 50. There, an official seal was placed on the late editor's manuscripts and belongings. Neither Grunya, the day-maid, nor the frivolous Stepan Bogdanovich was present at the time. The commission declared to Nikanor Ivanovich that it would take the late editor manuscripts, that his 3 rooms, the former study, parlor, and dining room of the jeweler's widow, would revert to the tenants' organization to be used as it saw fit, and that the editor's belongings were to be kept in safety and said rooms until the appearance of his heirs. The news of Berlioz's death spread through the house with unnatural speed, and on Thursday, Bosoy's telephone began to ring at 7 o'clock in the morning. Very soon, tenants began to arrive in person with applications asserting their claims to the dead man's rooms. Within 2 hours, Nikanor Ivanovich received 32 such applications. They contained pleas, threats, slanders, denunciations, promises to renovate at the applicant's own expense, complaints of intolerable crowding, and of utter impossibility to continue in the present apartment with thieving neighbors. Among other things, there were 2 suicide threats, a most vivid narrative describing the theft of dumplings, which the thief put right into his coat pocket in apartment number 31, and a confession of secret pregnancy. People repeatedly called Nikanor Ivanovich out into the hallway of his apartment, plucked him by the sleeve, whispered into his ear, winked at him, and promised not to forget him. This torture went on till noon, when Nikanor Ivanovich simply fled from his apartment to the office at the gate. But when he saw the tenants lying in wait for him there, he ran from the office too. He managed somehow to shake off his pursuers, who followed on his heels across the asphalt courtyard and disappeared in the entrance of building number 6, where that wretched apartment number 50 was situated. After holding on the landing for a moment to catch his breath, the corpulent Nikanor Ivanovich rang the bell, but no one answered. He rang again and began to mutter and curse to himself. Still no one answered. His patience exhausted, he took from his pocket a bundle of duplicate keys belonging to the house management, imperiously unlocked the door, and entered. "Hey, Grunya!" Nikanor Ivanovich shouted in the dim hallway. "Grunya, aren't you there?" No one answered. Nikanor Ivanovich took a folding ruler from his briefcase, removed the seal from the door to the study, and stepped inside. He stepped in, but on the threshold he halted in astonishment and even alarm. Behind the dead man's desk sat a gaunt, lanky stranger in a tight, checkered coat, a jockey's cap, and a pince-nez. In short, the same one. "And who may you be, citizen?" Nikanor Ivanovich asked in a frightened voice. "Ah, Nikanor Ivanovich!" the unexpected citizen cried in a quivering tenor, and jumped up to welcome chairman with a sudden and violent handshake. This greeting did not in the least reassure Nikanor Ivanovich. "Excuse me," he began suspiciously, "but who are you? Are you an official visitor?" "Ah, Nikanor Ivanovich," the stranger exclaimed warmly, "what is official and what is unofficial? It all depends on the point of view. It is all vague and conditional, Nikanor Ivanovich. Today I'm an unofficial person, and tomorrow, before you know it, I'm official. And sometimes it happens the other way around. And how it happens." This reasoning did not satisfy the house chairman in the slightest. Generally a man of suspicious nature, he concluded that the citizen declaiming before him was an unofficial, perhaps even a frivolous person. "But who are you? What is your name?" The chairman persisted with increasing severity, and even began to advance upon the stranger. "My name," the citizen replied, undaunted by the severity, "is, well, let us say Koroviev." But perhaps you would like a bite of food, Nikanor Ivanovich? Don't stand on the ceremony, eh? Sorry, Nikanor Ivanovich became indignant. Don't talk to me of food. We must confess unpleasant thought it is that Nikanor Ivanovich was a somewhat uncouth man. No one is permitted in the late man's rooms. What are you doing here? But do sit down, Nikanor Ivanovich. The citizen yelled, unabashed, and began to fuss, offering the chairman an armchair. Infuriated, Nikanor Ivanovich rejected the chair and shouted, But who are you? Well, you see, I am an interpreter. I am with a foreign gentleman who resides in this apartment. The man who called himself Koroviev introduced himself and clicked the heels of his rusty, unpolished shoes. Nikanor Ivanovich opened his mouth. The presence in this apartment of an unknown foreigner, and with an interpreter too, was a complete surprise to him, and he demanded an explanation. The interpreter willingly explained the situation. The foreign artist, Mr. Woland, has kindly been invited by the director of the Variety Theater, Stepan Bogdanovich Likhodeyev, to stay at his apartment for the duration of the visit, about a week or so. In fact, he had written Nikanor Ivanovich to this effect the day before, requesting him to register the foreigner temporarily, while Likhodeyev himself took a trip to Yalta. "You never wrote me anything," the chairman said with amazement. "Take a look in your briefcase, Nikanor Ivanovich," Koroviev suggested in a honeyed tone. Nikanor Ivanovich shrugged his shoulders and opened the briefcase, where he found Likhodeyev's letter. "But how could I have forgotten it?" Nikanor Ivanovich muttered, looking stupidly at the opened envelope. "It happens, Nikanor Ivanovich. All sorts of things happen," Koroviev chatted. Absent-mindedness, fatigue, an increase in blood pressure. My dear Nikanor Ivanovich, I am dreadfully absent-minded myself. One day, over a glass of vodka, I shall tell you a few incidents from my own experience. You'll die laughing." "And when is Likhodeyev going to Yalta?" "Why, he's gone already," shouted the interpreter. "Oh, he is way out by now. The devil knows how far he is." And the interpreter waved his hands like a windmill. Nikanor Ivanovich declared that he must see this foreigner in person, but the interpreter said it was impossible. He was busy. He was training his cat. "I can show you the cat if you wish," Koroviev offered. This, in turn, was rejected by Nikanor Ivanovich, and the interpreter immediately made an unexpected but rather interesting request. Since Mr. Woland absolutely refused to live in a hotel, and since he was accustomed to a great deal of space, would the house organization consent to rent him the entire apartment, including the dead man's room, for the duration of his visit for about a week? After all, it is all the same to him, to the dead man. Koroviev hissed in a loud whisper. "You will agree yourself, Nikanor Ivanovich, that he has no use for the apartment now." Nikanor Ivanovich replied uncertainly that foreigners were supposed to live at the metropole, not in private apartments. "I tell you, he's cranky as the devil," whispered Koroviev. "He refuses, and that's all. He hates hotels. Those foreign tourists, I've got them up to here," Koroviev complained confidentially, poking his finger at his scrawny neck. "Believe me, they take your heart out. They'll come and spy around like sons of bitches, or else they wear you out with their demands. This isn't right, and this isn't right. And your house, Nikanor Ivanovich, stands only to gain, and it's a clear profit. Money is no object to him." Koroviev looked around and whispered into a chairman's ear, "A millionaire." The interpreter's proposal was clearly practical. It was a solid proposal. Yet there was something remarkably unsolid and disreputable in his manner of speech, his dress, and his revolting, utterly useless pince-nez. Consequently, the chairman felt vaguely troubled, and yet he decided to accept the proposal. The point is that the house, alas, was faced with a good-sized deficit. By fall, he would have to buy oil for heating, and what on earth was he to buy it with? With the tourist's money, he might just manage. Nevertheless, the business-like and cautious Nikanor Ivanovich said that he must first clear the matter with the Intourist Office. "I understand!" exclaimed Koroviev. "Naturally, how could it be done without clearance?" "Certainly. Here is the telephone, Nikanor Ivanovich. Call them at once and clear it." As for money, don't worry about it, he added in a whisper, drawing the chairman toward the telephone in the hallway. If you don't charge him, who can you charge? You ought to see his villa in Nice. When you go abroad next summer, drop in and see it. You'll gasp. The Intourist Office settled the matter with extraordinary, quite astonishing speed. It turned out that they were already informed of Mr. Woland's intention to stay in Likhodeyev's private apartment and had nothing against it. "Marvelous!" yelled Koroviev. Somewhat dazed by his chatter, the chairman declared that the house was willing to rent apartment number 50 to the artist Woland for 1 week at the rate of... Nikanor Ivanovich hesitated a moment and said, 500 rubles a day. At this point, Koroviev completely stunned the chairman, winking thievishly in the direction of the bedroom, from which they could hear the soft leaps of a heavy cat. He wheezed, "That would come to 3,500 a week, wouldn't it?" Nikanor Ivanovich thought that he would add, "You've quite an appetite, Nikanor Ivanovich." But Koroviev said something altogether different. "What kind of money is that? As for 5, he'll pay it." With a confused grin, Nikanor Ivanovich found himself at the late editor's desk, where Koroviev, with the greatest speed and agility, scribbled out 2 copies of the contract. Then he dashed into the bedroom and returned with both copies bearing the foreigner's sprawling signature. The chairman also signed the contract, and Koroviev asked for a receipt for 5,000. Write it out, Nikanor Ivanovich. 1,000 rubles, and suddenly, in a manner somehow quite inappropriate to serious business, he began to count 1, 2, 3, as he stacked 5 bundles of new bank notes before the chairman. There was a careful count, interspersed with Koroviev's little quips and pleasantries, such as, "Money loves to be counted, your own eye is the best spy," and so in the same vein. After he had counted the money, the chairman received from Koroviev the foreigner's passport for purposes of temporary registration, put it together with the contract and the money into his briefcase, and yielding to the temptation, he sheepishly asked for a free pass to the theater. Certainly, roared Koroviev. "How many tickets do you wish, Nikanor Ivanovich? 12? 15? The overwhelmed chairman explained that he wanted only 2, for himself and Pelageya Antonovna, his wife. Koroviev immediately snatched up a notepad and wrote out a pass for 2 persons in the front row, and as he nimbly handed Nikanor Ivanovich the pass, with his left hand he slipped a thick, rustling bundle into the chairman's other hand with his right. Throwing a quick glance at it, Nikanor Ivanovich flushed darkly and tried to push it away. "We're not supposed to," he muttered. "I won't hear of it," Koroviev whispered right into his ear. "Here we're not supposed to, but among foreigners it is the only proper thing. You will offend them, Nikanor Ivanovich, and that will be awkward. After all your time and effort." "It is severely punished," the chairman whispered almost inaudibly and looked over his shoulder. "But where are the witnesses?" Koroviev breathed into his other ear. "I ask you, where are they? Don't think of it." And here, as the chairman asserted later, a marvelous thing occurred. The bundle crept into his briefcase by itself. After that, the chairman, faint and a bit dazed, found himself on the staircase. A storm of ideas raged in his brain. They revolved around the villa in Nice, the trained cat, the fact that they had indeed been no witnesses. He also thought how delighted Pelageya Antonovna would be with the pass. These thoughts were disconnected, but generally pleasant. Nevertheless, a little needle seemed to prick the chairman somewhere deep down in his heart. It was the needle of anxiety. Besides, a sudden thought struck him like a blow. But how did the interpreter get into the study when the door was sealed? And how was it that they had not asked him about it? For a while, the chairman stared dumbly at the stairs. Then he decided to forget it and stopped tormenting himself with complicated questions. As soon as the chairman had left, a low voice came from the bedroom. "I did not like this Nikanor Ivanovich. He's a swindler and a thief. Can you see to it that he does not come here any more?" "Monsieur, your word is law," Koroviev responded from somewhere, but his voice no longer quavered. It was clear and loud. And in a moment, the damned interpreter was in the hallway, dialed the number, and began to speak into the receiver in lugubrious tones. "Hello, I consider it my duty to report that our house chairman, Nikanor Ivanovich Bosoy of 302B Sadovaya, speculates in foreign exchange. At this moment, he has $400 wrapped in newspaper in a ventilator flue in his toilet in apartment number 35. This is Timofey Kvastsov, a tenant of the same building, apartment number 11. But I beg you to keep my name in confidence. I'm afraid the above chairman will try to get back at me." And he hung up, the scoundrel. What took place after that in apartment number 50 is unknown, but the events in the house of Nikanor Ivanovich are known. He locked himself up in the toilet, pulled out of his briefcase the wad of bills forced on him by the interpreter, and found that it contained 400 rubles. He wrapped the bills in a piece of newspaper and pushed the bundle into the ventilator flue. 5 minutes later, the chairman sat at the table in his small dining room. His wife brought from the kitchen a neatly sliced herring, thickly sprinkled with chopped scallions. Nikanor Ivanovich poured himself a glass of vodka, drank it down, poured himself another, drank it, and picked up 3 slices of herring with his fork. At this moment, the doorbell rang, and Pelageya Antonovna brought in a steaming saucepan. One glance was enough to guess that it contained fiery cabbage soup, and in the thick of it, the tastiest thing in the world, a marrow bone. Swallowing his saliva, Nikanor Ivanovich growled like a dog. "Why don't they go to hell? A man can't eat in peace. Don't let anybody in. I'm out. Out. If it's about the apartment, tell him to stop bothering me. We'll have a meeting next week." His wife ran out into the foyer, and Nikanor Ivanovich ladled out the fire-breathing lake, the object of his desire, the bone cracked lengthwise. At this moment, 2 citizens entered the dining room, followed by a very pale Pelageya Antonovna. At the sight of the citizens, Nikanor Ivanovich turned white too and got up. "Where's the toilet?" the first man in a white blouse asked in a worried tone. Something banged against the dinner table. Nikanor Ivanovich dropped his spoon on the oilcloth. This way, Pelageya Antonovna jabbered, and the visitors proceeded directly into the hallway. "What's the matter?" Nikanor Ivanovich asked in a low voice, following the visitors. "We have nothing suspicious in our apartment, and what about our documents, if you pardon me?" The first man showed his documents to Nikanor Ivanovich without stopping, and the second one immediately climbed up on a stool in the toilet and pushed his hand into the flue. Everything turned dark before Nikanor Ivanovich. The newspaper was removed, but the bundle turned out to contain, instead of rubles, some unfamiliar bills, bluish or greenish, with a picture of an unknown old man. However, all this Nikanor Ivanovich saw only vaguely, for spots were swimming before his eyes. Dollars in the ventilator flue. The first man said reflectively and asked Nikanor Ivanovich softly and politely, "Is this your little bundle?" "No," Nikanor Ivanovich answered in a terrible voice. "It was planted by enemies." "This happens," the first man agreed and added softly, "I guess you'll have to turn in the rest." "I have nothing. I swear to God, I have never held these things in my hands," the chairman cried desperately. He rushed to the bureau, noisily pulled out the drawer, and snatched out his briefcase, crying incoherently, "Here's the contract, the interpreter, that vermin planted it, Koroviev, in Pince-Nez." He opened the briefcase, looked in, put his hands in, turned blue in the face, and dropped the briefcase into the soup. There was nothing in the briefcase. No letter from Styopa, no contract, no passport, no money, and no theater passes. In short, nothing except the folding ruler. "Comrades!" the chairman screamed frantically. "Hold them! Unholy powers are at work in our house!" And now, heaven knows what came over Pelageya Antonovna, but she clapped her hands and cried, "Confess, Ivanich, they'll cut your term!" With bloodshot eyes, Nikanor Ivanovich raised his fists over his wife's head, spluttering, "Oh, you damned idiot!" Then he felt faint and collapsed into a chair, evidently resolved to submit to the inevitable. Throughout all this, Timofey Kondratyevich Kvastsev, out on the landing, bent now his ear and now his eye to the keyhole in the door of the chairman's apartment, dying of curiosity. 5 minutes later, the tenants of the building, who happened to be in the yard, saw the chairman walk directly to the gate in the company of two strangers. It was said that Nikanor Ivanovich was pale as a ghost, that he swayed like a drunkard, and mumbled something indistinct. And an hour later, just as Timofey Kondratyevich, fairly gulping with pleasure, was recounting to the other tenants how the chairman had gotten what was coming to him, an unknown citizen appeared in apartment number 11 and beckoned him out of the kitchen and into the hallway. There he said something to him, and both disappeared. End of chapter 9.